Thank you, and I will now turn to the ranking member, Mark Green, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Cyrus, and thank you for sharing your personal story as well. Thanks for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I especially want to thank Ms. Rosa Maria Paya. Rosa Maria, we applaud your courage in the face of tyranny. The testimony we're about to hear from her is from a courageous individual whose family has been permanently scarred. On July 22nd, it will be 9 years since her father, Oswaldo Paya, and his colleague, Harold Sapiro, were extrajudicially killed by the Cuban regime. He was a brave man and regretfully joins the ranks of many others who've died at the hands of the regime and under suspicious circumstances. Last Sunday was a momentous and an inspirational day. Tens of thousands of Cubans all throughout the country took to the streets demanding freedom from the communist dictatorship. Some even waved the American flag as they demanded libertad. Since 1959, Cuban people have been trapped by the iron grip of Fidel Castro, his brother, and its hand-picked successor. Despite brutal and violent crackdowns from the regime, many courageous Cubans continue demanding their God-given right to liberty and democracy, something 3 generations and millions of Cubans have been deprived of. Let's be clear. This is not about COVID-19. This is not about the embargo. What are the Cuban people shouting in the streets? Libertad. Cubans are sick and tired of being oppressed, and they are in the streets openly and bravely demanding an end to communism. Even prior to these recent protests, anti-regime sentiment has steadily increased in the country. In November, the communist regime broke up a hunger strike led by the San Ysidro movement, a collective of artists, musicians, writers, and scholars. This led to a large protest by hundreds of artists and activists in front of the regime's Ministry of Culture. These protests have been dubbed by some observers as an awakening of civil society in Cuba, and it sure looks that way. A new generation is rising up, and they want to live in freedom. I am in awe of the courage of the Cuban people and the many risks they take protesting the violent and brutal dictatorship. We must not ignore the dangers they face. An untold number of peaceful protesters and activists remain imprisoned. Demonstrators risk jail, degrading treatment, torture, even death, all for liberty. Additionally, the communist regime uses Chinese technology to block and censor internet service and disrupt communications across the island. These violations of basic human rights are absolutely unacceptable. We must demand action. This is a crisis that requires a bipartisan response. And Chairman Cyrus, I know this issue hits home for you, and I know you hear, as no one else can, the Cuban people's cries for liberty and dignity. Holding the communist regime accountable for its repressive policies while supporting the people's quest for freedom and democracy is crucial. I hope we can prioritize this issue for the good of all Cubans and for the good of the Western Hemisphere at large. The Cuban people have never experienced the kind of self-government and freedom that many Americans take for granted. As the freest and most prosperous nation in the world, the United States must unequivocally stand with the Cuban people against the communist regime. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and Cuba has never been closer. When will the Cuban people finally be free? When people of faith are no longer afraid of arbitrary detentions, threats, and harassment from communist officials, that is liberty. When artists, musicians, and writers can freely express their political opinions in song without fear of retaliation, that is liberty. When parents don't have to wait hours in line for basic staples like rice and beans just to feed their starving children, that is liberty. when the dying communist regime breathes its last breath, when a sovereign republic takes its place, and when separated families are reunited in a free Cuba, that is liberty. Mr. Chairman, the people of Cuba are looking to the United States for help and guidance. I look forward to working with you to answer their cries. Thank you, and I yield.